A man was walking through the woods, spreading with his hands the thin branches of the trees that only just reached the Jaeger's trail. The thin branches. He was so very tired. His knees and his feet ached. Wet feet were chilling. He would have given it all up long ago if only he could have mustered up the courage. The Jaeger squeezed himself between two large stones, held out his hand to the college, and went on browsing around. He feared that it was about to start raining, for the already dark forest was getting even darker. The Jaeger reached the tall cypress and sat on the large round stump. He only had to wait for his college who stopped to check the area for traps. The Jaeger lifted his head and closed his eyes. Decayed leaves were falling from the almost bare black branches that grew so thickly on top of the stump that they almost covered the blue sky. He had seen this picture 100 times, and if at first it brought him pleasure, now it made him nauseous. He sighed heavily and remembered the excitement of coming here. The Jaeger plucked up a quirky spike and showed it between his teeth. He came here more than 10 years ago. He wasn't so old as to exile himself so far from civilization. Suddenly, he stood up, looking for his college, but shortly sat down again and went back to his lingering memories. The man mentally returned to the day he offered his wife to move. That was the first time she knew her diagnosis and the periods that doctors had estimated for her. The doctor said she needed to live closer to the woods and away from the dirty air of the city. In that case, it was possible to extend her term. So it happens, Andy left the job he loved at the age of 30, neglecting his promising career developments. He took his wife and moved more than 1,000 kilometers away. She was surprised to live a year but lived four incredibly happy and long years, and then came to the end of not only her life, but his as well. He kept threatening to give it all up and leave. He kept saying to himself that he couldn't take it anymore, that he would get out of this forest. But he stayed for another 6 long years. It was his 11th year in the hut, and he was 41. He no longer paid attention to age and ignored everything around him. He just wanted to reach the end of his life. Yet it seems that the last year was bringing him back to life. He started to turn to the simple pleasures of the world and to be filled with life again. The process was slow, but he was glad of it. "Andy, are you really going to live?" a college asked, coming out of the thicket of the forest with 2 naturalized traps and a long rope with a loop on the end. "Look, right under our noses, it's a goddamn mess. Alright, we will have to call the department and tell them about this area. Let them scout the area on their own and catch them. So what is it? Are you really leaving, or is it all gossip? I don't know, Dan. On the one hand, I would give anything away to just live and forget about it all. On the other hand, I guess I have already put roads down in these woods," the man said. He was walking next to his friends, making his way toward the edge of the forest, which stood out brightly in the snow-white sunlight. Here was the most noticeable contrast between light and darkness. The man went first, intercepted the trap, and helped his colleague out. "I don't want to leave Helena here. She won't cope with it alone, and my dog is here too. I don't know, Dan. I can tell that if I had a place I can go to, I would have left a long time ago." The Jaegers left standing near the car for an hour. They mainly talked about work, about upcoming inspections, and laymen who were afraid of going into the woods but still wanted to work as Jaegers. They exchanged pleasantries and had a good laugh and said goodbye. Andy lingered for a little bit, looking at the leaving car, and went to the hut that was standing just on the edge of the forest. Single-story house blended with the trees. It was hard to call it a man-made building at first sight, although it was a very modern house inside, as evidenced by the long power line that stretched from the nearby urban village. Andy froze when he heard the barking of a dog. A beautiful sheepdog was running right at him. He wrapped his arms around him, and the dog almost knocked him down. Andy rubbed the dog behind the ears on top of his head and hugged him. The dog could not contain himself with joy. He was so excited about his owner's arrival that he shuffled from foot to foot with impatience, occasionally hopping in one place. "That's it, Achilles, that's it. Calm down, let's go into the house. I'm dreadfully tired," Andy said. The dog, as if by magic, muffled his excitement and followed his owner. He now did not step away from him, and he often took the dog with him, but not this time. It was too long a crossing, and anything could happen. The dog had a great big kennel to protect him from the rain and winds. There was plenty of food at the edge of the woods and a sack of food for emergencies, but Achilles rarely touched it in his owner's absence. Andy entered the hut. The first thing he did was to take off his wet, heavy clothes. He put it outside, turned the water for the bathtub on, and went into the kitchen. The man poured himself some hot herbal tea and sat down, listening to the water running in the bathtub. It was getting harder and harder for him to make such long walks. Apparently, his health was already ruined, and it was only going to get worse. His soaked feet didn't warm up, and he was shaking. Achilles laid down at his owner's feet, looking up to him now and then. Andy went into the hot bath almost without feeling the temperature difference. He didn't soon feel the hot water rush through him and warm him up. He felt such relaxation and pleasure that he almost started to sing. The dog still wouldn't leave his owner's side. Andy was very tired. He watched some TV and decided to go to bed. He woke up from a strange noise outside. The man looked up and froze. Something outside was almost at his door. The dog looked up and froze. Lying on the bed, he looked back at his owner. Andy put his finger to his lips and hissed. The dog realized he had to be quiet. He jumped off the bed and went to the door, ready to attack anyone who would come in. Andy looked out the window from behind the curtain. He took his gun and flew out of the house. "Come on, who dares to come to me at night?" The man shouted sharply, but there was silence again. A few minutes ago, he had seen strange silhouettes in the window, heard voices and rustling, and now it's nothing. "Achilles, search!" Andy's voice boomed. The dog immediately rushed around the house, sniffing the area. He froze at the path leading into the woods. He couldn't go there without his owner's permission. But then the bright light of the car came on. It rushed off, humming the engine. The dog rushed after the car, but Andy stopped him with a command. Achilles came back to Andy, sat down again at his feet, and froze, looking at his master. "Look at you, not afraid of anything at all." So they were in the woods and ran away from there quickly. They drew up without headlights. How cunning they are. Andy still stood with the gun. The dog was near the path. They waited for a while, but no one came out. Andy called the dog and returned to the hut. He collapsed on the bed and fell into a restless sleep. He kept thinking that someone was loitering in the woods or around his hut. The line between dream and reality dissolved. He woke up, looked at the quiet dog, and realized that he imagined it or was dreaming again. The man awoke heavily at dawn, exhausted by lingering dreams full of anxiety and frustration. He got up and went outside and looked around the area. He realized that they were exploring the area, wandering around and going into the woods, and upon returning got into a car and disappeared into the night, blinding him with the bright light of the headlights. Andy didn't understand who they were and why they had come. Poachers never acted so openly. And who else would want to drag themselves into the woods at night? It had been several days since Andy had spotted the strangers. He was packing for a little hike. The department had sent him to check the 4 nearby squares as well. It would take a day at most. Then it would be safe to go home. "Achilles, will you come with me?" Andy asked, and the dog froze immediately. He stood near his owner and looked into his eyes as if demanding confirmation. "Will you come with me?" Andy repeated the question, and the dog literally started to dance with joy. He jumped up and down, shifting from paw to paw, barking and twirling around himself. He longed to go with his owner to the woods, and Andy was not afraid to take the dog with him. He had never let him down. Andy threw a backpack on his shoulders and went in the direction of the forest. The dog followed him cheerfully. It had to be quick and easy crossing. The man met his friends at the edge of the forest, then barely pulled up as he immediately abandoned the car and went to his college. He rubbed the cheerful dog. They stood there for a while and talked. They were not going the same way. Each can explore his part of the woods. "They say you had a raid at night." The department said they came the next day and didn't find anything. "I don't think they were poachers, and they weren't looking there. You know, we're about to have a kingdom of criminal authority here, don't you?" So it seems to me that they were examining the territory and where to bring the victims, Dan suggested. He said goodbye to his friends and went to another part of the forest, and Andy followed him with his eyes and went in another direction. He went further and further into the woods. There somewhere to the right, he noticed an unfamiliar silhouette in the forest. He already thought his eyes were deceiving him, but it was a man tied to a tree. The dog froze, waiting for a command. "Achilles, the traps," said the man, and the dog began to sniff his way. Slowly, he reached the tied man and stopped. Achilles licked the woman's face. She was tied by the wrist so that her body curved unnaturally. The wire dug into her wrist until it bled. The woman was almost unconscious. She wasn't thinking. She wasn't answering questions. The man kept trying to bring her to her senses, but realized it was no use. The pregnant woman was firmly chained to the thick trunk of an oak tree. The man suddenly said, "Achilles, memorized," and the two of them ran toward the trail and back to the edge of the forest. The path he had taken hours to cover, they had covered in a quarter of an hour. He grabbed some wire cutters and pulled a large narrow slat from the cellar, which he often used to pull out trapped animals, including deer that had been crippled by traps. He fled into the woods, but now the German shepherd was running ahead. Andy ran after him, dragging the sled behind him, which rattled and clattered against rocks and branches. The sled was not designed for this kind of work, and it only made the process more difficult. But finally, some whitish rays appeared in the distance, which meant that everything was alright. Behind these trees, there was the long-awaited way out of the forest, and he brought the woman into the house and laid her on the bed. She fell asleep, breathing heavily. The man looked at the dog. "You stay on guard. I will write a letter. You show her I have to get back to work. What else can there be? Work is work, but if I understand correctly, she won't wake up." The dog remained sitting beside the pregnant woman they had just removed from the tree. He lay down on the bed, scratching out his long, free paws. The man scribbled a few sentences, put the sheets on the dog's paws, and left the house. He literally ran around the squares and returned as the sun was already setting, and he went out to the huts right at that moment. A big old pickup truck pulled up, which had clearly seen better days. It went silent, and a beautiful woman in her 40s jumped out. She fixed her tracksuits and walked over to the man. He kissed her and hugged her, but immediately blurted out who he found in the woods. Helena could not believe that this happened at first, and then when she entered the house, she was dumbfounded. "Is it her? What's her name?" "Gian, I think. The wife of Tom Brady, right?" said the woman, looking at the pregnant sleeping lady. "So we have to bring her to her senses." Helena went to the car and came back with a huge bag full of medicine. She took out a few bottles, treated the wounds, and brought the woman to her senses. She pulled herself up heavily but couldn't get up. Her head was very dizzy, and she felt nauseous, and they immediately jumped over, holding a large mug of chicken broth. "Pregnant woman, She drank from the mug, snacking on slices of homemade bread. She was silent. It was hard for her to talk. After eating, she fell back into sleep. It was normal, let her sleep. She didn't end up in these woods for no reason. I don't think we should call the police. Let her wake up and we will see what she says, Helena said. They spent another couple of hours in the kitchen, discussing plans for the future. The Jaeger shared his wish to live. Helena supported him, but for the time being, they both had nowhere to go. Soon they heard some noise in the bedroom. It was heard as the dog jumped off the bed and led the girl somewhere down the corridor. He was used to his owner going to the bathroom immediately after waking up and automatically took the stranger there, which she was very happy about. She asked permission, took a bath, and returned, putting on the clothes Helena had given her. The pants fit her well, but the tank top stretched on her stomach. The woman sat down on a chair and gratefully accepted her food. Come on, tell us, how did you end up like this? We both recognized you. We would have to be fools or blind not to know, Helena said. We thought it was too early to call the police, though. You ought to go to the hospital and get yourself checked out. No, they will find me that way, the woman screamed, jumping up from the table. Her eyes filled with fear and despair. Helena and Andy looked at her and didn't understand what was going on. She calmed down a little, sat back down, and started talking again. My husband, basically, he sold me for debt to some local criminal authority. That was before he even knew I was pregnant. He wouldn't give me back, so they kidnapped me, took me to the woods and tied me up. I thought I was going to die there. I even saw a wolf, believe me. There are worse things in these woods than a wolf, Helena said. It was no stranger to the nightmares that sometimes happens in the woods. She shuddered at her thoughts and shivered. She felt a little sick to her stomach. Helena spoke again. So what is it going to be? What are we going to do now? I can't ask you to do that, but if you don't help me, they will do worse to me than tie me up in the woods. I need to get home. My parents live there. Please, I beg you. They will destroy me if they find me here, the woman said, rubbing her hog belly. Helena and Andy looked at each other. Well, that's how it will be. I will go, you stay here. Andy said to Helena, it is not the first time you have lived here. The dog will protect you. Plans of patrol are on the wall. God willing, they will be back by Thursday, said Andy and then turned to Gian. Pack everything you need, including food. There will be no stops. We will get there quickly without noise. Get ready. She shuddered in surprise. For the last few minutes, she had been gathering her thoughts to start begging these kind people to help her. And he left some food in his cooler bag and threw a few bottles of water into the car. He kissed Helena goodbye and went to the car. The pregnant woman soon came out too. She pulled back the seats, tilted back, and sat down so that it was less comfortable. He looked at her and realized that there would be stops after all, and probably even more than he had bargained for. It was a long drive, but there was no other way. If she stayed, he and Helena would be killed along with her. They had been on the road for 6 hours. The woman had been asleep most of the time. But now she was awake for good and had risen to sit up comfortably. She began to fidget. It was obvious she wasn't feeling well. He pulled over to the curb. Such a big pickup truck could drive without seeing the road at all. She looked at him gratefully, then immediately got out of the car. She came back from behind the bushes and started stretching her legs. Her whole body was stiff and aching. Are you married? She asked, turning to the Jaeger, remembering their warm relationship with Helena. No, we are not. I have already been married once. My spouse passed away from a serious illness on my hands. I strongly associate marriage with death, but I would like to be with her. I would like to buy her a house by the sea and stay together. But you see, we have been Jaegers most of our adult lives, and that is why we can't do anything else. So how can we have a house by the sea? Said the man with melancholy in his voice. They stopped 4 times for the next 8 hours. She can no longer sit. He spread out the back seats so she could lie down, but it only made her feel worse. Then the cherished sign showed, and they drove into an elite cottage village. Andy had never seen such castles. Mansions lined the wide streets one by one. She suddenly shouted, and he stopped. The woman jumped out of the car and banged on the gates with all her might. A guard flew out immediately, but when he saw her, he contacted the owners of the house by radio. The parents almost fell on their knees in front of their daughter. Apparently, they knew she was missing and didn't expect her to be brought straight home. The woman's father shook the Jaeger's hand firmly. "I won't forget it. God knows I won't forget what you did. My daughter chose the wrong man to marry and could have died, and you weren't afraid to drive a hell of a long way to bring her here. Not afraid of her husband or anyone worse," the man said. The Jaeger said goodbye to him. He was anxious to get home as soon as possible. He drove quickly, only stopping at gas stations. The man was in a hurry, worried about Helena. Who knows, maybe they would come looking for the young lady, and Helena would be there alone. She was not a timid woman. She could handle a rifle and take down a man twice her size in hand-to-hand combat. Yet he was still very worried about her. Andy arrived home well after midnight. He left the car and entered the house, where Helena was already sleeping sweetly. The dog greeted his owner silently, realizing that the woman was asleep, and he decided it was time to leave. He got on the phone with the office and told them that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow he wouldn't be here. They took the news favorably. Apparently, they had long found someone else to replace him, and he began to gather his things and realized that there was not much to pack. Helena also packed and drove up to Andy's house. "Where are we going now?" she asked anxiously, looking at her beloved man. She was excited to finally leave, but she was anxious that they had nowhere to go. She clung to him, understanding and imagining how hard it would be for them. He hugged her tightly and held her close to him. He was sure that he could make everything so that they could establish a new life in a new place. Yet their plans were ruined. An expensive snow-white car drove up to the cottage, literally sparkling in the sunlight. The father of the woman they rescued from the forest, where she could have died, got out of the car. "I told you I wouldn't forget what you did. Get in the car and follow me. Just follow the trail," he said, wagging his finger. Andy and Helena looked at each other, jumped into the pickup truck, and it started following the snow-white expensive car. They drove for more than 7 hours, getting pretty tired. There was only one stop at the gas station. Their legs were aching, and their stomachs were twisting with hunger. But since they had promised to drive, they had to keep going. Finally, the white car pulled off, drove into a coastal cottage village, and stopped outside a beautiful light and sandy cottage. The man got out and said, "My daughter said you wanted to buy a house by the sea and a job. Here's a house by the sea for you. Tomorrow you will go to the bank and you will understand that you won't have to work anymore." He thanked Andy for his help again, handed him the keys, got back in the car, and drove off. Andy froze with the keys in his hands. Only a few minutes later, they finally entered the courtyards, all covered with vines and rose bushes. It was incredibly beautiful here, like in a fairy tale. Andy couldn't believe that this was his home now, although the papers in the kitchen only confirmed it. A cozy little kitchen, a spacious living room, a large bathroom, 2 offices, and a beautiful bright bedroom. They walked around the already furnished house several times. It was their home, a real home. Helena laughed enthusiastically, clapped her hands, and threw herself around Andy's neck. The cheerful dog had already run around the yard and was not inspecting the house. He was particularly interested in the rooms where he could lie down on something big and soft, and the living room was to his liking. The next day, the Jaeger did go to the bank and was dumbfounded when he saw the amount in his accounts. He stood in front of the bank manager and could not even utter a word. They issued the cards and returned home. They were fabulously rich, and indeed they might never work again. They both could hardly believe their happiness. It had been a month since Andy and Helena had settled in that college. They walked along the seashore, clinging to the already cool sands with their bare feet. Achilles sprinted along the seashore's edge, raising columns of snow-white splashes. He jumped into the water, freaked out, ran ashore again, and started his game from the beginning. He clearly liked the sea better than the forest. Andy embraced Helena. They were standing together, staring into the distance, looking at the beautiful, calm sea. I still can't believe that it all happened. It always seemed to me that I will soon wake up in that hut or in my house, Helena said. You know, we were happy in that hut too. Helena smiled, pressing herself tighter against the man. Jaeger kissed her, and then looked at the dog again, playing near the water's edge. Look at him. The dog is in his 20s and still behaves like a puppy, and he said. Achilles, as if he understood that it was about him, rushed to his owner, holding an object in his mouth, and he put up an open palm. The dog put a rather large, beautiful shell in his hands. Andy and Helena looked at the beautiful, ornate seashell with a whimsical pattern. He put his arm around Helena again, and they both sat on the sands, looking out at the serenely beautiful sea. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.